institutional influences that have a transgenerational effect. Now, that's not an excuse. That is an explanation. That is the context within which we toil. And in my role as a state lawmaker, I'm hoping to illuminate these policy decisions, past and present, and to effectuate change in a meaningful way for everyone. I represent 64,000 people here in upper northwest Philly, so Chestnut Hill, Mount Airy, West Oak Lane. I have one of the richest neighborhoods in the entire state. I have a working class neighborhood, and I have one of the very few intentionally integrated neighborhoods in the entire country, Mount Airy, where I live. But I represent 12.8 million people. I'm not a district lawmaker. I'm a state lawmaker. And me and 202 of my colleagues in the Pennsylvania House of Representatives, our job is to create, amend, and repeal state law. And we have a statutory responsibility to pass a balanced budget. And
that's been a problem.
That's been a real problem. That's been a real problem. And ideology and hyper-partisanship has gotten in the way. It doesn't mean that Democrats are good and Republicans are bad. It means that the process is deeply problematic.
Well, that's part of the problem. It's that we've gotten to the point where we can't agree to disagree anymore because I have to be right. And for me to be right, you have to be wrong.
And it's not a zero-sum game.
It really isn't. And when you decided to do this, did you take the family into a room and sit down and say, I want to discuss something with you?
Well, the biggest factor was my mother.
Okay.
She's a very, I am admittedly a mama's boy, but I'm the youngest of two brothers, and I hold my mother in high regard. My father died about 12 years ago. He never talked about politics. He voted, but he did not talk about a lot of, controversial issues. That was not his personality. My mother, on the other hand, quite the opposite. And I needed to ask myself a number of questions before I called her, because I was afraid that if I called my mother prematurely, she would assert herself in ways where I could not distinguish between what she encouraged me to do and what I felt I should do. So I had to come to a point and make some internal decisions before I could make that phone call. So here were the three preconditions I made before calling my mommy. One is I needed an outward validation that I would get the strong support of my own backyard, which in political terms was the Ninth Ward. The Ninth Ward represents all of Chestnut Hill and part of East and West Mount Airy, and it's the highest voter turnout ward in the entire city of Philadelphia. So if I didn't get the strong support of the Ninth Ward, I didn't think there'd be any chance of me winning. Secondly, I need to look at the data from past election cycles to see how anyone from my part of the district with my profile could win. So it was very quantitative. And the third thing was I needed to know that I could raise money from family and friends and colleagues and neighbors so that I could be financially viable to launch a campaign against a front runner who was supported by this area's political establishment that had been in power for over 30 years. And once I could check off all three of those boxes, I could call my mother. And so I did. And she said, "What took you so long?" So for 45 years, she'd been hiding the fact that she knew that I was meant for public service.
She didn't want to influence you, though.
She didn't want to influence because she knew I was a knucklehead and that I was obstinate and contrarian. And that if she said, "You should do this," I would just shut it down.
Yeah.
So she was very patient and clever. And so she let the moment come to her. And I called her and she's like, do it. And
That's good.
She's been my biggest supporter. But I have many supporters, many of whom I was the first candidate they've ever written a check for or to, and the first campaign they've ever worked on. Because they knew what was in my heart and they wanted to see me serve, because I think in some ways that's the type of person they wanted to represent them if they didn't live in my district. They said, well, I wish someone like you was running, in my neighborhood, in my city, in my community. So it was a very strong affirmation.
Yeah, and you want politicians are polished and they're like a lot of them are like failed actors, and they think that people want that. Somehow they've got misconstrued that people want, that failed daytime soap star and representing them politically, and that's not what you want. I mean, I want a guy that's smarter than me and dressed better than me, but that's about it. I don't need a winter tan, and I don't need someone who talks like he's selling me siding, and I think
that's reasonable.
I think a lot of people just are caught up in that. They don't know how to be. Or sometimes I see people who've been politicians so long, they don't know how to be an average guy because they feel anointed to something. And
I can't relate to either of those kind of profiles because, like I said, I only considered this in earnest,
Right.
At 45 years old. I've done other things, and this was not really on my bucket list.
What was the next step if you didn't do this?
Well, I was teaching at Temple University in the Fox School of Business. I was teaching socially responsible business, which is, near and dear to my heart. I wrote a book in 2010 called Invisible Capital, How Unseen Forces Shape Entrepreneurial Opportunity. And it was talking about what is the ethic around promoting business and entrepreneurship? What is the context that we need to consider when we encourage people to start a business, when it is one of the most high-risk things you can ever do? It's up there with getting married. Or,
so you left that cozy gig to go to the grist mill of Harrisburg?
I wouldn't quite put it like that. I was unceremoniously uninvited to return to teach because I helped unionize 1,500 adjunct professors.
Yeah.
So I was not as welcome at the end of my 8th consecutive semester as I was in the first. But I was living my values. What I was doing, asserting my First Amendment right, speaking up on behalf of worker rights, was in line with what was at the heart of my book, which is about what does it take to build community wealth? How do we use entrepreneurship to create a type of wealth that transcends financial wealth for personal benefit? How do we help society at large? How do we help communities in need through entrepreneurship? And, what is at the heart of community wealth? It's public safety, it's public health, it's public art, it's public education, it's public infrastructure, all the things that make a society a civilization. And part of that is taking care of your own, taking care of the people who are the teachers, who are the first responders, who are the most vulnerable. And most classes across the country in higher education are taught by part-time professors who are paid a poverty wage, who don't have benefits, who don't have any job security. But 70% of all classes taught on college campuses are taught by adjuncts. And it was not in line with my values. And I had to speak up, and I paid the price. And that what happened around the time, a few months after I had announced that I was running for office. But, I'm a hustler in the best sense of the word. I have a very non-linear approach to life and career. So I've done a number of things. And so I didn't know what the future would hold for me.
What's your fun job that you would do?
Well, my fun job is being a dad, I guess. I like hanging out with my kids.
Something else.
And in terms of my past?
Yeah, I find that many people I interview have side passions, but many of them, and you just seem to be later in it. It was almost like this was their destiny. This is your destiny, Luke. And it almost seems like they can't imagine.
That's a lot of pressure. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know about the destiny piece. Maybe that's so. I will. I won't go there, but I will say.
Well, it seems like your mother was sweating in the background and waiting for you to, get in line. It only took 45 years.
Right. And now I'm on a roll, right? I would say, for me, my passion beyond this notion of social entrepreneurship is genealogy and family history.
Okay.
So you probably could hear that from my previous comments. But there's very few things that I can't connect to an ancestor. And it drives my kids crazy. They're 11 and 14. And, it could be a color. It could be a day of the week. It could be a city. It could be a subject. And I will connect them to an ancestor of theirs.
I've done genealogy on my family. And one of the things I learned about genealogy is different people in the family go through phases in it. And when you're doing it, you're annoying to everybody else. Because you want to relate everything to everything, and you've got a 200-year-old story that you want to tell while people are just walking by.
Right.
And it's like I remember doing. We had a family reunion. I was unable to make it, and I made these great graphs and everything. And there was birth dates, and there was marriage dates, and the math wasn't adding up. And my brother took the stuff down there, and he said, "Well, it's from a computer." My grandmother and my aunt said, "You better teach that computer to lie." Those dates aren't adding up. That's not no, that's what the records show. And they took down my nice charts and laid them down. But,
that is one of the lessons.
Yeah, that's one of the lessons is that some things are supposed to stay hidden. There's family secrets. You have a passion for the job, and you clearly enjoy the job and like genealogy and other things. Would you want to see your children go into this?
I wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy.
So many people say that.
But it's mostly true. I mean, I love this job because it's not really a job; it's a vocation, right? I get to help people every day. In so many different ways, oftentimes in unspoken, quiet, indirect ways through my wonderful staff. But that's what I get to do. And I guess what I want to share is that we all have gifts and treasures we can share. It doesn't require us to pursue elective office. In order to be involved in politics, you don't even have to vote. Because many people can't vote if they're not citizens,
right?
If they have a felony and they haven't, re-registered, if they're not 18. And my grandmother used to say, even flushing the toilet is a political act. And it took me years to understand what she meant. But who lays the pipe? Who decides how far the public infrastructure extends to what communities? We may take for granted that we have indoor plumbing, but at some point, an elected official decided what gets addressed. So the fact that you can flush the toilet is an expression of power, is an expression of being included into something that has been created through a political process. And we have to remember that. So I think people can be a part of the process in different ways.
You said you wouldn't wish it on, I get that from a lot of people, but they're also very passionate about it, and they wouldn't change anything, but they wouldn't wish it on anybody.
Well, but this my journey is my journey,
right?
And my kids' journeys, and my kids are very different. One is one way, one's the other way, and so maybe they will overlap professionally or in other ways. But you have to find what's right for you. There's some people who like engaging in very specific ways, and maybe it's not the right time. So maybe you're interested, but you don't have the level or breadth of experience or skill to enter into the fray, and so it may be premature. What do? Do you say, well, because I can't be a U.S. senator at 27, I'm not going to do anything? Right. That probably says something about you, right? If you're more concerned about the position than the purpose.
Is there anything you'd like to say to the voters and the constituents or just people listening? As we wind up?
I would just say that understand that despite all the awfulness that we read in the newspapers and on social media, that there is a subset of elected officials that are true public servants. And just because you don't know their names doesn't mean they don't exist and that they're not working for you. It's not nearly a big enough subset of elected officials, but we're out here and we care. And the best way to know that we're doing our job is to know who